Welcome to the Peace is Possible podcast, a space for real talk on healing, leadership, and conscious change. I'm Eva Dalak, founder of Peace Activation and your host. Each episode brings you insights and tools to help you live and lead from a place of inner peace and ripple that peace outward. Tune in, reflect, activate. Subscribe whenever you listen to podcasts and visit peaceactivation.org to learn more. Hello, Ashley. So good to see you.
Good to see
Well,
you.
good to see you. Welcome to the Peace is Possible podcast.
Mm. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited about this conversation and really appreciate the space you're holding for these dialogues.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I would like you to introduce yourself. I always find it much better when a person speaks of who he is versus listening to a
Mm.
whole list of achievement that I would read. You're amazing beyond anything else, and I am really excited about this conversation. But why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I try to not start off by what I do for a living, but kind of where I'm from and kind of, what's at the core of my work.
Mhm.
I'm Ashley Bell. I'm from Gainesville, Georgia, which is in the deep South, about 50 miles northeast of Atlanta. I'm uh, from an area that is probably one generation removed from America's experience with Jim Crow. I grew up in the deep South in a place where we had double everything still. I live in a place where I went to a church called St. Paul United Methodist Church,
Mhm.
and it was predominantly African American. And then 2 miles away on the other side of the railroad tracks was also St. Paul United Methodist Church, which was predominantly white. And so I grew up seeing everything twice. So, and this was just fingerprints of Jim Crow that still existed, where places were segregated, and then legally they weren't. But as Dr. King said, high noon was still one of the most segregated hours on Sunday in America. Despite that being a time of deep reflection and with our faith and with our God, it still remains that way in the deep South. And my parents were educated, went to historically black colleges. I think that's important because um, you know I'm the first generation in my family to be able to go to college of choice. My
Mhm.
parents went to black colleges because they legally had to.
Mhm.
They could not go to integrated schools because they were before integration. So I hold that space for
Mhm.
recognizing the privilege that I have to live in a world where a lot of our journey when it comes to access uh, uh, was on the backs of my parents' generation and generation before them. And so I find myself in the work that I am in now because I grew up in the Atlanta area, which was the cradle of the civil rights movement. It is sort of the birthplace and a very
Mhm.
strategic birthplace. So it's not just like, you're not going to look on the history books and see a lot of historical things that happened in Atlanta, but you're going to see a lot
Mhm.
of people from Atlanta everywhere something historical happened. And that was
Mhm.
very intentional.
Mhm.
When you see the Martin Luther Kings, the Ralph Abernathy's, the Andrew Youngs, and all these people that came out of Atlanta, they didn't do anything in Atlanta. They did it all in Montgomery, in Selma, in Albany, and Watts, in Chicago. And I say that because when you hear me speak, I do carry that legacy of the sort of deep thought that goes into movement making. Atlanta had to be protected at all costs during the
Mhm.
60s. Birmingham was Birmingham, while Atlanta was growing and emerging as the capital of the South when Birmingham used to be. There was an agreement between Black leaders in Atlanta and white business leaders that they would keep Atlanta peaceful. They would provide economic opportunity for African Americans, and we would fight the fight down the road in other states and other places. And that's
Mhm.
what gives you the Atlanta you have today.
Mhm.
And so I come out of that school of, um, you know, being deeply thoughtful about how our actions have ripple effects. How we can't. You have to keep our eye on the prize. What are we actually fighting for?
Mhm.
One of my great quotes that I learned from one of my dear friends was, in the fight for justice, we uh, can't get too focused on who we're fighting that we forget who we're fighting for. And far too many times our politics and our courses of action, and when it comes to the liberation of people and the expansiveness that we try to create for opportunity for marginalized communities, then we get focused on people and parties and things as the enemy. And that focus, that negative power that comes with that, sometimes can blind us to the true opportunities in front of us, and derail us from truly keeping at the center of the mission, at the center of the cause, the very people we're fighting for, because we're too focused on the people we're fighting against. And so I hold that space as I um, carry in this phase of my life, having been a lawyer, having practiced law, with an arc that is not traditional. I started off practicing law in the Deep South, representing poor people as a public defender in the jails deep throughout the South, primarily in the Atlanta area. People that I felt were unfairly incarcerated, people I felt that were victims of um, one, that being poor in America is dangerous, being poor in America is expensive, and it is a powerless position and a capitalist structure, and so we have to deal with that justice system that perpetuates that by having people who truly understand what's at the core of it and try to bring justice into that arena. So I dedicated my life to that, as well as my father, during that part of my career, worked at a jail. And really, people who hear my story hear me talk about all the time how he was such a critical phase of, part of my growth as a lawyer, um, because he worked at a juvenile jail, Eva. And what I did is I tried to focus on the kids. I felt like if I was truly going to have impact, it was going to be with some kid that was lost in the system between ages of 12 and 17. That's pretty
Mm,
much make or break. I mean, once you get into the cycle and the cycle's got a hold of you and the system's got a hold of you, it's really hard to get out. But
yeah.
those kids had kind of like on that last shot. And so my father was the warden of a juvenile jail. And I was able to go into those jails as a young lawyer, fresh out of law school, University of Georgia and LSU. And he would tell me the true story of what was happening to those kids and how they ended up there. And this is became the basic baseline for my entire career and the different journeys we may talk about today. Is that my father would um, tell me that the file that the state gave me, telling me the charges against this kid, uh, to take them for what they are. They are, one version of a story of a system that sees this kid through a certain lens, and I
Mhm.
can't allow myself to see that child or that young person through that same lens, and that it
Mhm.
is not their whole story. That what the government gives you on someone only tells a small snippet, and it's your job as a lawyer, as an advocate, as someone trying to bring justice into a place of injustice, that you have to have an expansive view and learn the whole person, because you won't find a solution if you don't truly understand the problem. And I think that is at the core of everything I've tried to do, is have a very holistic understanding of the problem,
Mhm.
holistic understanding of the people who are victims of the problem, and have a holistic solution that embodies their humanity, embodies their greatest aspirations of life, and giving them the best path forward. And so, I never lost a case when my dad worked with me. He always gave me the inside story. So when I walked in there, I was able to do what we have to do in stressful situations, which is bring humanity into spaces when humanity is lost. Far too many times, even with the work that you talk about with peacekeeping, once you lose the human element, once you don't see someone as human anymore, or see them as having value, or you see them as a problem, uh, then you would treat them as such. And once you lose that humanity, dangerous things can happen. And
Mhm.
so I've tried to do my best to bring that humanity from the stories of my father telling me, this kid wasn't in here because they were, you know, fighting in class because they just wanted to fight. They're fighting in class because they never learned to read and they had nothing to do in class because their teachers failed them. They kept getting promoted and they're asked to do things they're not capable of doing. And they never learned to read because nobody would diagnose them. They had dyslexia and they don't have access to special ed education and all these things. And it's like this snowball effect that happened to this kid. And then you ask yourself, what can I do to be helpful? It can be overwhelming. There's no problem we'll talk about today that on its surface uh, can overwhelm the minds of the most intelligent people, and can be far greater than most of our hearts can bear, the pain and misery that comes from our failure to address these problems. But I do think that it's worth our time, it's worth our efforts, it's worth us finding spaces to bring other people together. Because one of my favorite quotes from MLK was always that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it
Mm-hmm.
bends towards justice. And knowing that where we are, somewhere in this small moment of time on that long arc of the moral universe, that we have to do our part to bend, because the people before us did their part to bend. They did their part to pull that arc a little bit closer towards justice. And while we're here, we have to do our part so that whoever comes after us, whoever continues the conversation after this podcast, will know that we did our best to get that arc a little bit closer towards where we felt it needed to be the greatest reflection of the potential of humanity at this moment in time.
Mm. Beautiful, Ashley. Like I really love how you articulate this, and I think that's when where we connected on really this vision of humanity, the belief you have such a deep love and belief in humanity, which I share. And I feel like the first step for conflict and violence is dehumanizing the other. There's
That's
no
right.
way we can kill someone if we know that he's a reflection of me. And it doesn't matter the color, doesn't matter the gender, doesn't matter the identity, the religion, and all this separation that society have put us into boxes. And I feel like this flexibility in the identity, this adaptability to context, and what you're speaking to is really a deep listening to the field. You deeply listen who that person is before all this, before he or she were put in a box, and kind of define, and society define that this person is has nowhere to go from here other than
Mm,
jail. And I feel like that speak to restorative justice, that speak to all the truth and reconciliation that are a necessary tool after conflict, after violence. And
mm,
I think that it's really important that we see that as a tool, as an opportunity that we all have. There's no one person that wakes up in the morning and say, I want to fail. We're all
right.
our
Right.
best, you know? So thank you for this, and thank you for this perspective. And one thing that really spoke to me when we met, and when you shared about your journey, is like you have done so much to bring in equity, justice, and finance into like community building and community solidifying. Can you speak more about that, and also about the journey that you share in reality life? That really traditional, the ideas of worthiness, I would say, or credit worthiness, or what it.
Hmm.
I feel
Hmm.
like I when we spoke,
Yeah.
I said that what if peace is as profitable as war? What would that make? And I feel like this you kind of flip
Yeah.
it well in your
Mm.
own way.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing, topic to dive into when we talk about the worthiness period in systems
Mhm.
and the thresholds
Yeah.
that are created for people to have access to systems, institutions. Um, you know, Not to be pessimistic, but just to talk about history for what it is. I mean, our system and the inequities that we have to, struggle to fight against are extraordinarily intentional.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's not one system that we're dealing with to try to change that isn't doing exactly what it was created to do. And so I think that's where we miss. There's a divide in the dialogue, because some people are like, oh, it's agnostic. The system just does what it does, and the outcomes are just what they are, because people either don't try hard enough, or they don't work hard enough. And
Hmm.
and the people who usually say that are the people who are benefiting from the system, and the people who usually disagree with that are the people who are not, right? And so we have to figure out, how do you bridge these two realities? And this is where science and data come into it, because you have to, you know um look at the way the world, has this sort of hierarchy of
Hmm.
when it comes to people. Even when we talk about, from an American perspective, what was at the core of Jim Crow. I mean, Jim Crow was copy and pasted from India. It was
Mhm.
a class system that America looked over and said, "Oh, look at the Dalits, what they do in India. We should treat black people in America like that." The exact same rules were copy and pasted. So it also took Martin Luther King Jr. sort of looking at Gandhi's movement against that system
Mhm.
and copying pasting a nonviolent movement to be an answer to it. So history repeats itself because
Yeah.
these institutions repeat themselves. Someone looks and sees a way of maintaining power, and they recreate it. And I think we look at our financial systems in our country, especially the thresholds that are created, have a deep embedded bias that
Mhm.
I fundamentally believe. Um, you know, I believe in capitalism. I believe it. I believe it can work. I just think we haven't proved it can work for everybody.
Mhm.
I think that capitalism in America, we haven't really tried it. I think we've had a faux or counterfeit capitalism in America. And it gives this ideal where we say, oh, we're a capitalist country. And we've been saying that since day one, right? Since day one, America's like, this is capitalist. But then at the same time, you tell 12 million people they have to work for free. and that's not capitalism. It's not to tell someone that you have to be an indentured servant, a slave, and you can't earn a living wage. It's not capitalism when you have, 200 years of women not being able to own property. That's not capitalism. It's not, none of it is. And so we are continuously challenging
Mhm.
the definition that is put in front of us, which is exactly what MLK did in his speech. He said, we know what the Constitution says, we know what the preamble says, but what we're doing is two different things. And so
Mhm.
we're calling out our systems to one, recognize the system that we have is flawed. Um, do the things we need to do to call out where it's flawed, but also at the same time create new systems. The one thing about America and countries that allow for technological innovation at the scale is that you don't have to be stuck with the system you have. If you can create something better and it works
Mhm.
in the marketplace, people will use it.
Yeah.
It's actually easier to create another system than to fix a bad one. It's
Mhm.
actually easier. So when we talk about our credit system, one of the things we learned is that, we look at, home ownership, which is one of the businesses that I have with Dr. Bernice King, which is focused on affordable housing. Um, we had to realize that, when we looked at the numbers, credit scoring systems in America are outsourced to three companies. And those three companies pretty much determine everybody's access to credit. And when we talk about why does credit matter, here's the reality. Credit is like water. Where
Mhm.
credit flows, opportunity can grow. If you
Mhm.
show me a community that does not have access to credit, I'll show you a community without opportunity. I'll show you a place that has a check casting place on every corner. I'll show you liquor stores every 200 feet. You'll see, tidal ponds all over the place. You'll see
Mhm.
predatory practices of every shape and size everywhere you don't have credit. What you don't see is a bank next to a liquor store.
Yeah.
You never see it. And so when you remove the banks and the institutions that provide fair credit, it's a signal that this is a place to be pillaged, and this
Mhm.
is the place where it is highlighted every day that it's expensive to be poor. That it takes people who have a hard time making ends meet to make it more expensive for them to do so. And so for us, it was like if we take the credit scoring system in America as it is, and we look at the facts show that only 47% of African Americans in the United States own a home. Um, 72% of white Americans own a home. 52% of Hispanics, 60 high 60s Asians. And when you look at that and you say, like, how is this possible? It's because the credit scoring system says that only 40% of African Americans have a credit score worthy of owning a home. So think about that.
Mhm.
How can a system say that 40% of an entire race of people don't aren't worthy of the dignity of having the roof over their head belong to them? And when you look at that and you say, okay, if I'm not a racist person, I just fundamentally believe that, people have similar aspirations and want to succeed in life. There's something has to be wrong here for
Mhm.
40% to be told that, because that same 40% is saying that these people aren't worthy of owning a home. That same stigma that's in that data reaches far beyond creditworthiness. Even it reaches us in our classroom. It
Yeah.
reaches us when a teacher tries to talk to us, a young black girl who's 8 years old, and she's sitting in the front of the class trying her best. It's that same stigma that the majority of you don't deserve this, don't deserve to be here. It's that same stigma that the majority of people of color get when they get pulled over by the police. It's that fear that I'm looked at as a majority of of people that look like me aren't worthy to have what everybody else has. And so these systems create this perpetual stereotype. And so we believe that you don't have to that it doesn't make any sense that out of that 60% of the people who don't qualify, the majority of them rent because they can't get a loan to own. The majority of them rent. And then when they rent, they're actually paying more per square foot than the people that own the homes.
Mhm.
They're actually paying more money
Yeah.
for less and then told they aren't worthy
Yeah.
because their job is to perpetuate a real estate system to where there's somebody always on the bottom and they actually are paying more than the people who own. And so
Mhm.
it's not a matter of if they have the money or not, is that the system needs someone perpetually on the bottom. And this is where in marginalized communities we have to
Mhm.
come together because so many times they try to put us against each other and see who's on the bottom today. Who's at the
Mhm.
bottom of the ladder today? Oh, I guess they're on the bottom. I moved up a rung. This is where King, said so eloquently that we are all tied in a single garment of destiny. Everybody,
Mhm.
whatever affects one of us indirectly, affects all of us directly. Every one of us. There's no way of escaping it. And so when we look at some of the biggest challenges out there, I try to make the case that this fight to create a better system where we can look at people holistically the same way my father taught me to look at that file that came in for a 12-year-old that's been skipping school and fighting in class because they don't know how to read and because they needed special attention because of special education and um, not taking that file as the whole story. That's all we're trying to do in the financial sector is we're trying to create the whole story to tell the entire picture and do so in a responsible way because fundamentally if your rent is $2,000 a month, then why wouldn't you pay a mortgage if it was $1,800 a month? Like
Mhm.
this isn't rocket science for us. We're just trying to look at a system and say, let's create a system where the marketplace says, you know what? These people have been paying rent, which is
Mhm.
more per square foot than a house for years. Let's let different metrics tell us what they're capable of paying because there's
Mhm.
money to be made there. They don't want the house for free. They just want to be able to own the house. And if you want to make money with these folks, let us show you a better way of doing that. And that is what we're encouraging. We're encouraging the marketplace to not fight over the same pie, to expand the pie, expand the metrics. And in that, you can
Mhm.
tap into what capitalism does well,
Mhm.
which is people will look for a good opportunity. It's just that we have to create lanes of opportunity into communities to let create these rivers of credit, these rivers of opportunity into these
Yeah, I love
communities
that. Yeah.
and once they reach there
Yeah.
then you'll see things blossom that will choke out the predatory powers and the weeds of the community because people will see that I don't have to go to a check cashing place or a title pond and get charged 40%.
Yeah.
I can go to a regular bank. And this is why Dr. King and I went into banking because fundamentally in this country, it is at the cornerstone of the entire American system when it comes to access. And we believe there needs to be more access points.
Absolutely. I mean, I love how you weave in safety, worthiness, interdependence, and abundance. It's like it's at the core actually of all conflicts and why
Mhm.
people fight and why people
Right.
kill each other. It's like you touched here at the core of how financial exclusion has been built into isolation and using ignorance of people to kind of suppress them and exclude them from a system that is built upon their own marginalization. And I think it's really like, for me, I see the parallel between the two,
Mhm.
between like what you're doing with this economic inclusive, basically inclusive economic system and financial access to healing, to psychological safety in community. Because ultimately, when we don't have safety, that's when we will come out and steal, fight, kill, because we don't feel safe in our own home or we don't
Mhm.
feel worthy. of having a home or having a roof on our head. And I think that sense of worthiness, that sense of safety that is so deep and most of the time dismissed as an inner reality, but actually the environment where we grow is influencing that sense. Because if we're being
Hmm.
excluded constantly from a system of power and the power dynamic is used against us and blaming us for the situation where we are not seeing the structural violence. And for me, as a Palestinian that grew up in Israel and seeing the structural violence, I grew
Hmm.
up in a system of oppression that was telling me it's democratic. Just like
Yep.
in the US, you're growing up within a system that say it's capitalistic when actually it's based on
Yeah.
using slave power. So I
Hmm.
wonder, in given this context, what's your vision for peace? What's your vision in this context?
Yeah. I think when we talk about peace, I've obviously, because my businesses in this space. My co-founder is Dr. Bernice King, Dr. Martin Luther King's youngest daughter,
Mhm,
and we seek his words and his thoughts, as well as his wife Coretta Scott King, equally as much. To be honest,
mhm,
when people look at his life and legacy as the great drum major for peace, is what history uh,
mhm,
looks at him as. He only lived to be 39, and it took to 1982 for us to have a King holiday. That only happened because of the work of his wife, Coretta Scott King. It was her carrying the torch and keeping his legacy alive. People forget that
mhm.
this great drum major for justice and peace was polled as one of the most unpopular men in America when he was assassinated.
Yeah.
And now he's celebrated as one of the most universally positive across all ideologies. And that doesn't happen without time and someone is a keeper of that legacy. And Coretta Scott King was that, as much as Dr. Bernice King is that today. And it's saying that, some of the work that I'm doing in this space now is so uh, connected to the King Center for Nonviolence.
Mhm,
And when I think of, how at the King Center, the work that I do at Dr. King, how we try to frame peace,
mhm,
and how we try to frame nonviolence is from a perspective of, in the 60s, in the early part of the movement, nonviolence was literally that. It was looking at men and women of all races and creeds being hosed by firemen for the pursuit of justice, being beaten at lunch counters, being arrested, men being lynched, churches being burned. And
mhm,
so you fought for this nonviolence. It was a physical absence of physical violence, just an absence of physical violence. And I think as we've gone deeper and expanded to a global footprint for peacemaking, the King Center has been at the forefront of helping educate all of us that nonviolence is a lot broader than that and more
mhm,
uh, directly related to the ability of us to live an abundant life. And if there is a child anywhere in this world tonight that is going hungry, then the forces that cause that hunger are causing violence against that child.
mhm,
In a world where we still have women being persecuted for exercising the same rights as men,
mhm,
um, whether that's denial to the ballot box, whether that's denial to jobs, or that's unequal pay for same work, that too is violence against women.
mhm,
And when we seek to create peace, it is through our efforts to make sure that we aren't harming others just for the sake of perpetuating power and for the benefit of a certain class or a group of people. And I think that our work to do that has is crystallizing now in a very unique way. I'm leading an effort with the King Center and the Aspen Institute now, that will create a new Aspen Fellowship focused on peacekeeping. And
mhm,
that effort, was kind of sparked by Coretta Scott King before she passed. She always envisioned that the King Center would evolve over time into the West Point for peacemakers, a place where the greatest minds around peace could come and work together with great industry leaders, people that are moving the needle from everything from pharmaceuticals research to um, military defense, as well as philosophers, nonprofit leaders, and those that sit in the world of ending poverty. And I think that this new fellowship that we're creating, that will launch next year, is at the core of taking an Aspen Institute approach of small classes, 20 25 people who are um, moving the needle in their respective journeys. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're deep into peacekeeping work, but that we believe they definitely should be. And I think that's where you and I kind of sit. Like, we can talk. The choir is a great place to sing, but it's the
Mhm.
sinners in the congregation that need to hear us, right? It's like there's no point of us just singing. There's nobody in the congregation, so we have to go and recruit the people who we know that, should they decide to live a more robust existence in their workplace, with a peacemaking mind, with a world view that is kinging it in the sense of nonviolence and perpetuating a greater sense of humanity, then if that is the case, then we'll have a different perspective in this world on how we view healthcare CEOs. We'll have
Absolutely.
we'll have different perspective of how we view leaders of state and states that are places that have been torn with violence for decades. So in this new effort, we will launch a cohort every year of 20 to 25 leaders in partnership with the King Center for Nonviolence as well as Aspen Institute. And each one of them, in order to, it takes 2 years to graduate. So we're going to do, part of it is inspired by the time I had with you in Kenya. We will spend some time in the refugee camps. We will spend some time in India studying Gandhi's road, and as well as the deep south of America, the sort of cradle at the end of the civil rights movement. And all this is to say that at the end, each one of them has to create a venture, meaning a new business or enterprise focused on peacemaking and nonviolence in their respected areas that they are experts in. And we have access to capital to make sure that we can help them fund those ventures. But if
Mhm.
we can create a world where 20 new ventures are coming out even every year that are focused on peacemaking and all across the world in every industry possible, that is my view of where I hope we can leave this world and say that we did our part and we bent the arc a little bit further towards justice.
That's absolutely amazing. The only thing I would edit is
Please
from
add it.
making is to peace activation. We had this conversation
Yeah,
already
we
in
did. We did. We
and we
did.
had
Peace activation. I love it.
peace activation because I feel like you know my background, like working with the
Yep.
UN and peacekeeping mission. I feel like there's no peace to keep. We need to activate it. We're not making peace. We're not keeping peace. We're not, like there's so much around conflict resolution and conflict transformation. It's like we need to understand that peace is here within us and it's activated inside out. If we are able to bring leaders to become peace activator, understanding that it's
Hmm.
holistic, that it's from the inside, from the part of that we keep aside, like this is my professional life and this is my personal life. No, you don't leave yourself outside of your professional life. You don't leave your humanity outside of your conflict zone. You bring it all in. And what I call peace activation is based on these four pillars that we also discussed in Kenya, which is really the conflict transformation from within, linked to spiritual psychology, linked to
Mm,
trauma healing, trauma informed
mm.
practices, linked to embodied feminine wisdom, because we definitely need to bring this all interconnectedness, because that's what you're speaking about. When you're talking about participatory and inclusive financial system, you're basically bringing in a model of functioning that is very feminine, that is based on
That's
wisdom
right.
that we forgot, that we're bringing now in. And so for me, this cohort would need to go through my cohort of peace activation core foundation training, which is how do we link the activation that we have inside in the work and the action and the venture that we're doing outside, so that it has
That's right.
the highest impact possible, so that we link impact, leadership, and also community, and it's community driven, and that's
That's
where
right.
real reconstruction can happen.
That's right. That's right. You're right. I think you're exactly right. And I definitely going to make that note. Peace activation is definitely the way to look at it. We sit at a very unique time in this world, as you know. And how we use the words to
Mhm.
describe the work is so
Yeah.
important. And I definitely take that to heart.
Thank you, Ash. So another question I had is really many people have lost faith in institution. Mainly, like a lot of the institution have lost
Mhm.
credibility for the past couple of years. I mean, first for me personally, unlike for someone that have worked mostly in international institution like the UN, the World Bank, and the European Union, I lost credibility in this institution and many other institutions also. And I'm wondering, like in such a time where we're moving, we're shifting consciousness, we're shifting, something is shifted. What is, how can finance become the vehicle to build trust, to have this community and leaders to taking on themselves and staying true to the dignity and justice and belonging, because we're living in a time where people don't feel belonging anymore. And I wonder, how do you build that using what you have as a tool?
Yeah. You know, we live in a time where obviously is every day sort of language to say that we're polarized, that we are divided. But we also live in a world, you know, that is more politically violent than ever.
Hmm.
Even from living in the States, the day that I opened my bank in Salt Lake City, Utah, with Dr. King by my side, and we cut the ribbon on opening a bank that was the first bank in America ever created as an impact bank, created through the work of great foundations, but for the benefit of people who are chasing their dreams and entrepreneurs across the country. We called this bank Redemption.
Hmm.
It was only 45 minutes before I cut the ribbon, uh, 25 miles away from where I cut the ribbon, Charlie Kirk was assassinated, literally right around the corner from where I was at the time. Um, in less than, a calendar goes by, we had a healthcare CEO assassinated. We've had a president suffer attempted assassination. We live in a world now where I hate to say it, and I had to explain this to my son who was sitting in the front row at the ribbon cutting, and he couldn't process that. He said that I remember assassinations like this happening in the '60s. Like I didn't know this was still a thing that's happening in that world in America anyway. And I said, we're entering a dark era right now where um, when we talk about how do we, grapple with the tough issues, it started what we said earlier about humanity, but the words and how we use them are far more, powerful. Um, Death and life is in the power of the tongue. Scripture teaches us that, how we use words and what we say. And I think that we have to do a better job in this next generation because these are young people that are at the forefront of this. These aren't old people doing this stuff. These are under 30-year-old people who are taking arms against systems that they don't believe in, that they don't have faith in, to your point. So much so that they're willing to throw away their entire life to assassinate someone they think is a symbol of what they don't want, they don't agree with. And that is at the core of what we have to challenge is how do we, in a world where this generation was taught you got 140 characters to say the best thing you can say and tweet it out, you got one picture that has to say every word on Instagram. How do you teach that generation to communicate in a world where AI is telling them, just tell me what you're thinking, I'll write it all out for you? you know we have to focus on how we teach our young people to communicate. That's the bottom line. Until we can get a better way for them to express themselves other than platforms that actually incite hate,
Yeah.
and dig and delve into their darker nature, until we can create a marketplace. Because this is what I fundamentally believe. I can say all this, but until someone decides that it is profitable, to your point,
Yes.
to be peace, to have
Thank-
peace,
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
someone creates the platforms and the technology so that that is an alternative
Yeah.
that is profitable,
Hmm.
then the profiteers of darkness will continue to profiteer darkness. And so it is a challenge to the technological community. It's a challenge to my friends who are creating the new AI every day, is that we have to find better ways, because I guarantee you the people who are going to be most attracted to this new product, if it can come out that way, are the parents, the people like us who are looking at it trying to figure out, like, I don't want my kid on social media. It's like there's nothing there that's good. Give me an alternative. There's not mom or dad saying, I don't want you to see anything. Everything in this world is rated G, when we know that as soon as they leave our house, it is not rated G. So we have to get out of that mindset. But
Hmm.
it has to be instructional. It has to be encouraging. It has to be positive reinforcement of the words and the ways that people can live together better than what we're seeing. Because
Yeah.
if all we're doing is latching onto the worst idea and the worst meme and the worst words, then we'll lose a generation,
Yes.
and we'll break the link that I talked about earlier of those that are bending the arc.
Yeah. And I think the word that comes to mind, I have an 11 years old and a 13 years old. The word that comes to my mind is it has to be fun. It has to be playful.
Hmm.
It has to, we have
That's
to
exactly right.
we have to attract them more than this social media and this gaming. Like my son wants to do gaming, and I'm like, there's no way you're doing that. You're doing heart-centered listening, and we had a process this weekend. Like I just came back from a trip and asked them, okay, how do you feel? They're like, oh, mom, not again. We're not gonna do process again and sit down and triad. Like the methodology.
Yeah.
We did a
Yeah.
triad. And they're like, we
Wow.
don't like it when you come back from a trip and then we have to do a vision board and we have to process. And I just want to go and play. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing. In this family, we're not doing it this way. And I think that's the key as parent that we need to model and we don't know if it will succeed, but at least we tried our best.
That's
And
right.
maybe they hate us right now, but maybe in the future they will thank us. And I think that's where the peace activation inside out is really key. And so this brings me to my question to you. How do you see inner transformation influencing collective change?
Yeah. I think that's I'm hopeful that when we talk about the molding of a new generation, I think that that's a part of growing up that shouldn't just be left for adults. I think
Hmm.
right now, when we think of personal growth and transformation, and how we deal with childhood traumas all the way to life traumas, and coping mechanisms to deal with a world that at times may feel against us.
Yeah.
Um, that efforts for adults needs to work its way down to a younger generation.
Hmm.
I think we spend so much money on wellness and mental health, that we forget about the kids that are going through it right now, and the ability for them to understand how to cope with trauma at an earlier age, I think, is important, because a lot of the things that we see from bad actors are them responding to traumas that they had at some point,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and it didn't go reconciled, and it never was addressed, and so you see them lashing out against the world as adults once they get the power in their hands to do so. And I think that what how would the world be different if we had to reach them younger?
Hmm.
And so I'm hopeful that as we are forced to reimagine education, because let's be honest, education in our country
Debatable.
and
Yeah.
around the world in the next 10 years is going to be massively different.
Hmm.
It's hard to make the case that the majority of our education won't be outsourced to artificial intelligence sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of possibilities that could be positive and negative. But the
Hmm.
reality is that if done correctly, with the right people who are heart-centered leaders in place,
Hmm.
that you can reimagine education to include not only the technical skills necessary to be functional in a society, the understanding of history, to give yourself context to where you are in this moment in time, but also the tools necessary to look internally, to
Yeah.
constantly be in evolution, and being able to understand as you go through different the stages of life, that you can reinvent yourself, that you can evolve, that you can, you know, find a new way to live if you don't like the way you're living. And I think that goes to the part um, of the hopelessness that a lot of our young people see. How do we give them hope? Is it
Mhm,
has to come internally. And I think that until we can help them help themselves and
yeah,
create space for that, because as long as you have a system right now that is tied to rubrics and tests that have to be teachers are teaching to tests and trying to make the metrics and get the and chasing the almighty government funding dollar just to survive,
mhm,
that's not really focused on what you and I are talking about right now. There's
yeah,
no point in that metric that
mhm,
it is profitable for
yeah,
kids to have that introspection. And again, this goes back to our theme today is like, how do you make it profitable to make people better? And if you can
yeah,
instill in a system, education system where school systems are rewarded and teachers are rewarded for the personal growth of children as much as the academic accolades of children,
mhm,
then you will see a race to the top.
absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yes, activating peace inside out and activating really I feel like it's something that is our birthright. It's not
Hmm.
something that we need to, you know, to go and find somewhere else. It's something that is within, and we just need to come and realize how activating that part of us that is kind and gentle and soft and tender, all the things that we've pushed aside, and that it can go hand in hand with systemic and collective transformation. I think that it's really how leaders stay grounded in their own peace, and also with awareness of what are your traumas. How are you dealing with your trauma? How are you trauma bonding with another leader and then creating these wars that then destruct everything, that destroy people, homes, countries? And so I feel like sometimes it's really like observing what's happening globally is like, how aren't we seeing that this is all intergenerational trauma that is repeating itself? It
Hmm.
said
That's right.
history repeats itself. Absolutely, it repeats itself because we didn't deal with the trauma. And
That's
I
right.
like for me, and remember when we were on the boat and I said we have to drop the drama, heal the trauma,
Mhm.
and activate peace. And
That's
that's
right.
really the sequence. Unless we need to remove all the drama that we have around what's happening globally and address it as a traumatic experiences, just like the reference that you had with the children that goes to this prison. What happened in their home? Why
Yeah.
are they traumatized? And how are you dealing
That's
with
right.
the trauma so that you can activate peace? Yeah. Coming
Thank
to
you
an
so much for giving the just a beautiful container for us to have this conversation. I mean, I've always, found it so hard to find authentic places to have these conversations, and you do that so well. So thank you for all you do to create these spaces, and I hope that everyone listening continues to tune in because I'm sure you just time and time again meet the moment, and just excited and honored to be a part of this with you today.
thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I had a last question for you of
Okay.
how you stay personally grounded. What do you do? What's your tip? How do you stay so
I make
inspiring and
I
amazing?
you know I make time to enter just throw myself into situations that will force me to challenge what I know,
Mm,
which is how you and I had time together.
mhm.
There's no point in my schedule where I'm like, there's 10 days to go to Kenya and just I just,
Yes.
if you can surround yourself with people who are constantly challenging themselves and willing to dive into the beautiful unknown,
Mhm.
and knowing people like you and our friends that were able to take us on this trip to Kenya, I trust people who are like-minded. Even if we don't agree on everything, it means that we do agree that we always are trying to be better,
Yeah.
that we always believe that there's something else. There's
Yeah.
some idea that we haven't thought of yet because we haven't got the right people in the right space to think of it.
Mhm.
That I'm one inspirational word away from
Mm,
having a new view, a new task, a new mission.
mm,
And so I need to be around those people who can create those inspirational moments. And the trip that we did to Kenya and what I saw in those refugee camps, um, it drastically changed what I thought was possible in the work that I do every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't have said, I know I have 55 things to do right now, but there's a version of me that's on the other side of this trip that I want to know.
Yeah.
And I deeply want to know that version of myself. So I will put aside, the mundane things I have to do right now and say, look, for me to be better at what I have to deal with every day, I need to constantly interject inspiration into my life. And sometimes inspiration comes from seeing um, people who are dealing with the hardest aspects of the human experience,
Yeah.
and feeling deeply for their struggle, their pains, um, and wanting to be helpful. And that deep want, um, even when it's like we said, we start this, even when it feels insurmountable, even when it feels
Mm-hmm.
impossible, um, that search, you will find
Yeah.
amazing things within you when you look to try to find the solutions, especially when you do so from a place of a deep love for those that are the least, the last, and the left behind. Uh,
Yeah.
that space is where all my inspiration comes from. So I'll continue to make time. So next time you call
Amazing.
me and you're like, "Hey, Ashley, there's another adventure to be had," I know it would be a
Amazing.
worthy one and beautiful
Th-
for all of us.
There is one. I'll speak to you about that. Thank
Okay,
you
I'm sure
so
there
much,
is.
Ashley. Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you. I
was
really
such a
appreciate you.
pleasure. Thank you. Have a
Talk
beautiful
soon.
day. Talk soon. Bye.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for holding space with us. If this episode moved you, please support the Peace is Possible podcast by subscribing, sharing it with friends, or posting it online. Every ripple counts. We'll be back next month with another conversation that dives deep into what it truly means to activate peace within and around us. To support the vision behind Peace Activation, visit peaceactivation.org and follow along on social media. You'll find both Peace Activation and me, Eva Dalak, across all platforms. Until next time, may you meet yourself and others with peace.